Welcome to my talk on Cribl custom commands for people who don't already know how to do Cribl custom commands. Along the way, we will learn a little JavaScript, but the important goal is to get at least some sort of custom command working in your environment so that you can use it and modify it to whatever you need to do. So let's get started. Who am I and why should you listen to me? I'm Rich Mahlerwein. I've been a member of the Splunk Trust since its inception in 2015. I live in northern Wisconsin with my wife, and I have 2 teenage daughters. I enjoy volunteering my time helping others. I am a Cribl noob, and I'm certainly not a JavaScript expert. So to answer the second part, maybe you shouldn't listen to me. I do have a short set of disclaimers, mainly saying that this is all wrong. There's probably typos. Don't copy and paste code from PowerPoint because it's terrible. All those kinds of standard things. The filtering commands inside the Cribl documentation have great examples. They provide a mechanism for either letting events pass through or dropping the events from the pipeline, depending on some criteria or another. It's relatively straightforward to follow the code. It makes a lot of sense. It's pretty easy. The example for augmentation does not follow that same simple recipe, though. Does a lot of interesting things with the JavaScript that makes it difficult to follow unless you're fairly well versed in JavaScript, and I'm not. So I figured I would just figure it out myself, starting from the filtering command and then eyeballing that augmentation one for quite a while and fiddling around with it until I came up with something that did work. And as I did that, I realized other people could benefit from this knowledge too. The second part of the problem. Cisco, in some of their products, sends in IP addresses as signed integers. Those are not as useful as Cisco seems to think they are. They are sortable, sort of, but other than that, they're just useless. Converting it really isn't a very hard mathematical thing to do. It doesn't even take a whole lot of code. So I found something on the internet that looked like it should work. It's pretty straightforward. It was easy to kind of confirm that it would indeed work, or at least should. And so I decided to try to implement it. So let's get started. The first thing you need to know is the files and where they're located. If you create a directory in wherever your Cribl home directory is, local Cribl functions, name it after your function, like the num2 IP that I'm going to call this one. Inside that, you'll need at least one, and probably both files, index.js and the conf.schema.json. The index.js file is your actual JavaScript command, and the conf.schema.json is a configuration file that's used for defining the inputs and outputs and requesting that information from the user. Here is about the simplest skeleton I could come up with. What it does is it creates a static output field that's named my output field, and it sets it to a static string monkey nose. I don't know why I picked that, but it felt right. And you could see in the yellow code that the only real thing I have to do is set the events my output field to that static string. You'll notice the white code is there, and that is really sort of boilerplate. You can mostly leave that alone. You'll see as we go through that this stays the same. Our next step, because that's not very useful, is to actually let us create the output field name using code. So we're going to request that from the user and ask the user, what do you want the output field name to be? And whatever they set that to is what we'll then set the string to. You can see our first set of yellow code at the top creates an output field, and then it requests from the configuration file what the name of that output field should be. We're looking for the variable out field inside the configuration file and assigning it to this thing. And then down here, we just use that as our field name. You'll notice it's not in the single quote, so it's not a string anymore. We're actually interpreting the value of the configuration file's output field. In order to do this, we need to create our conf.schema.json file. And relatively straightforward. It's really not that complex, but you'll see we defined the output field as we need it. So let's take this a step farther. You'll notice I've color-coded inputs and outputs. We do essentially the same thing though. We just request both a conf.in field and the conf.out field. So we use that information then to set the output field to the same thing as the input field. Not particularly useful. It does copy a field from input field name to output field name though. In order to use this, we also need to modify our conf.schema.json. And here it is. Just like the first time, we just need to add in the out field. When you use the conf.schema.json set up like this, here is what it requests. You can see that inside Cribl Logstream. Now, let's do something more exciting. Let's actually do some math, at least real work of some sort. For this instance, we're going to need a temporary variable, so we create one. We set the temporary value to be our input field value. We do some division, then we reassign the temporary value into our output field. Lastly, here's the full solution to my problem. You'll see there's a lot of boilerplate that you've already experienced in here. What I've done is added this piece of code here. And you'll notice that's really just doing some math against our destination IP address, well, our input field, which is dest IP address, and doing the conversion for us. It outputs whatever the output field name is. All right, I think it's time for a demo. So the first thing I did to run this demo is in Cribl, well, actually just in Notepad. I created a quick test file. This is just JSON. It's hand-coded. It wasn't hard, even for me, and I don't like JSON. In any case, I uploaded that into my Cribl instance and attached it in here, created this new pipeline for us to test with. And here we go. Oh, and then I created a parser real quick to actually parse the JSON object out to make it into actual fields. So you'll see we don't need a field for test 1 or test 2, but 3, 4, and 5 I have input fields we can use to build things from. So let's go ahead and do an LL here so you can see I have a handful of folders I have created for the tests. Each one has a different version of the file. Let's cat test1/index.js. You can see what this is. So there's our export name, test1, and this one just creates the output field of monkey nose. So over here, we'll go ahead and shrink this guy. We'll open this up. You can see I've put in a description. Let's turn it on and we'll save it. And over here in the right panel, you should see after it thinks for a moment, a field named my output field with a value of monkey nose. And there we go. So that works. We'll go ahead and leave that running as well. For test 2, we're going to allow ourselves to create the output field by typing it in down here. So I've told it to go ahead and generate it as test2 output. You could name this whatever you want at this point. Let's cat the file, test2 index.js. And you could see again that it should set output field equal to the monkey nose. So test2, we'll actually turn this on and we'll see that our output field is test2 output. Watch over here and poof, there it is. For our third test, which is third in line, it follows along with the talk itself. We need an input field and an output field. So we're using test3 as the input. I could have picked any one of them. It's just going to make dumb copy go into the output field, test3 output. Let's cat this real quick. Test3 index.js. And you can see, yeah, so the output field equals the input field. This should work. So we'll turn that on and click save. And now we should have a test3 output. And there it is, where we just copied that across. Let's clean this up a little bit and turn off maybe 2 and 3. Okay, we're not going to save that because we'll turn on 4 first. 4 creates a selectable output. This is the one where we do real math. We're going to actually do division. And you'll notice our test input 4 is 4 So that's going to end up being a floating point, but let's see. So let's cat test for index.js. Yep, here's our division, temporary value divided by 3, and then make our output field be the temporary value. So this should be fine. We should have this output field. Oh, we better turn it on. Save. And there it is. Test for output. So for our last test, which is actually the production script here, let's do cat test 5. You'll notice I have it commented and stuff too. As soon as I can press the right keys, you'll see it does stuff and things, and here's a bunch of math, and here's some more math, and but it should work if everything goes to plan. So we'll leave number 4 on as well. Let's expand 5. Test 5, which finally does the real work. We're going to call that, test 5 output, yay! And let's turn it on, save this change. And there's our IP address. I think I would call this a resounding success. To wrap up, I have a few final thoughts. Take it one step at a time. It's very easy to make mistakes that will make the whole thing not function. And if you do it one piece at a time, you can always backtrack to the last working example. When in doubt, you can ask. The Cribl community Slack channel is available, and it's a great resource with lots of people on there who are more than happy to help. You can also search the interwebs for JavaScript plus some vague idea of what your problem is. Cribl's blog that I referenced before on extending Cribl's custom functions is also available, and it actually really is a good resource. In that page, search for "To Keep It Simple" and read through that example. And lastly, don't use PowerPoint for code. It is really terrible to get the formatting to work right and to make everything correct. And be careful, as I mentioned, if you try to copy and paste out of it. Thank you for listening. I hope this is as useful to you as it was to me.